Hey, Kevin, you know that video series you said you wanted to do teaching the basics of puppetry?
You mean the thing that we're preparing to shoot right now? Yes.
Well, Adam Kreutinger here has already done that.
Well, first of all, it's Adam Kreutinger. And second, that's great.
Wow, he is really good at this. I don't think you're going to be able to top this.
Well, that's not the point. We're not in competition. The more the merrier.
Adam's got really good hair. You don't.
Hey everyone, it's me, and it's the first video of 2020. So surprise, surprise, the break has lasted a little bit longer than I anticipated. The reason for that is quite good, because the Etsy store has proven to be a little bit more popular than I originally anticipated. And so I've been spending a lot of time building puppets, much more time building than I expected I was going to do, so I haven't had a lot of time for writing. That's a roundabout way of saying that season 2 of The Oracle is still coming, but is going to take a little bit longer than I expected. I didn't want to have just nothing on the channel until The Oracle was ready, so I started trying to think of things that were sort of quick and easy for me to shoot that the audience hopefully would still be interested in. I got this idea late last year based on some comments and requests that I've seen both to me and in various puppetry groups around the internet for a Puppetry 101 series, teaching the basics of puppetry. And up until now, that hasn't been something terribly easy to find on the internet. There's been a few videos here and there, but nothing that's really prominent until a couple of weeks ago at the time of this recording when Adam Kreutinger,
Right, Kreutinger, I'm sorry,
released his first of the series of Puppetry 101. If you don't know Adam Kreutinger, and if you're watching this channel, you probably do know Adam, but he is, among other things, the great guru of puppet building. He has many, many excellent tutorial videos on his YouTube channel, as well as being the co-host of an excellent puppeteering podcast called Puppeteers. I urge you to go and watch all of Adam's videos. He is a fantastic creator, hugely popular, very well known. So at first I thought, should I even bother doing this anymore? Because, Adam's a professional. He is an excellent YouTube creator. He's an excellent tutor. So is there anything I can offer that he hasn't? And then I thought, that's not really the point. The point is, if two puppeteers are telling you the same thing, that's probably an important thing and you should pay attention to it. And so I think the best way to proceed with this is to consider my videos kind of supplemental material to Adam's. Adam has far more experience. Adam is a professional. Watch Adam's stuff, and then you can sort of use these videos as little supplemental things. I may touch on a couple of things that Adam doesn't, just based on my experience. But by all means, use Adam's tutorial videos as your kind of foundation, and then you can come to me for little ideas and little tips and tricks. One of the things I'm also going to be doing with this series is I'm going to be focusing almost exclusively on puppetry for the screen and specifically YouTube content. I'm not going to be covering any stage stuff because I've never had any experience with that. So Adam is covering stage stuff. By all means, go to Adam's videos for that. But I'm also going to be talking about some of my production process, some of the equipment that I use, and I'm going to get into slightly more technical stuff later on down the road. I'm also going to keep these videos kind of small and bite-sized. We're only going to cover one topic per video, and that way you can kind of take them in bits and pieces and work on them at your own pace. So before I get rolling, I'd like to point out that there are, of course, other places you can go to learn the basics of puppetry. Adam's new video series should be your very first stop. But if you want to spend a little bit of money, there's also Mike Quinn's Secrets of Puppetry. Mike Quinn is a famous puppeteer. Most famously, he was Nine Num in the Star Wars series. He's worked for the Muppets. He was Gobo Fraggle in the UK version of Fraggle Rock. He's done it all. He is a very successful puppeteer. And before I did The Oracle, I did Mike Quinn's Secrets of Puppetry course, and it improved my skills, tenfold. So by all means, if you want to spend a little bit of money, that is a course well worth taking. So I'm not going to go into nearly as much detail as somebody like Mike Quinn does, but I'm going to approach this series based on just my own personal experience It's worth noting that I am an amateur. I have never worked as a puppeteer professionally, so please don't take my advice as some kind of, these are the rules. This is just a guideline based on my own experiences. So the very first thing any puppeteer is going to tell you about puppetry is you have to practice. And when we say practice, we mean practice. Like, if you can, practice every day. The only way to get better is to just keep doing it. And I think a lot of people get a bit discouraged when they're not really good right away. Because intellectually it doesn't seem like puppetry should be all that difficult, and it turns out, particularly when you get in front of a camera, it is. And I think that's probably the first thing I should talk about is, since this series is going to be focusing on puppeteering for the camera, when you're practicing, when you're doing puppeteering, and you're just practicing kind of like this, just looking at your hand, you can develop some very good techniques and instincts. That's a really good way to practice. But the second you get in front of a camera, it's a completely different thing. And I'm going to just have a look at, I have a monitor here, of course. Doing this is completely different from doing this. And you can build up some very good muscle memory practicing to yourself, but it does not equate to the same thing when you get in front of a camera. If you want to learn puppeteering for the camera, get a camera. You have to do it with a camera and a monitor. There's no way around that. A kind of half measure is if you can practice in a mirror, if you have like a mirror that's high enough, or if you can get down low enough and practice in a mirror, that will get you kind of a halfway point there. But the important thing to remember is in a camera and in a mirror, the image is flipped. And this is one of the stumbling points that a lot of people who are new to camera puppetry struggle with, is this reversal of left and right. So you want your character to look this way, but in the camera your character's looking that way. So that is something to be aware of. And that is, again, something you can only get over by practicing, and practicing with a camera. Every puppeteer that I've ever heard that's commented on this has told the same story of that it being really confusing and really against your instincts when you get in front of a camera for the first time, because left is right and right is left. Sometimes you can get what are called reverse scan monitors, or digitally the image is flipped, and so it's more like a mirror, but most of the time you are going to be working with right is left and left is right. So it is the kind of thing that you will only get by practicing, and it will happen suddenly. All of a sudden your brain will just understand that it's this way. And it's not something you can really be conscious about. You just have to practice. So how do you start practicing? This is something I think that sometimes people can get a little bit disappointed with, but it is good advice. The best way to start practicing is to practice without a puppet. Sometimes the physicality of the puppet can actually interfere with you seeing how you're performing. And you end up, if you just practice with the same puppet all the time, you end up really knowing that puppet, but you're not necessarily building universal skills. You're building skills specific to that puppet. So it's best to actually start without a puppet at all. This is bare hand puppetry. And Jim Henson is famous for saying that when they were looking for people for the Muppets, they looked for people who could put their entire performance in their hand. And that is kind of the mentality that you have to develop, is that this is a complete unit. This is a sort of singular, separate entity from you. So that's the first tip, is to practice, and practice without a puppet. If you do practice with a puppet, I recommend something very, very simple, like either a sock puppet, or maybe one of Adam Kreutinger's snoofs would be real good. Something that's very simple, something that doesn't have a lot of physicality to it, and something that you will be able to see every little subtle thing that you do. But the very best thing to practice with, I've shown these before. This is literally just a couple of ping pong balls. I've got like a piece of plastic and a couple of screws in there to keep it steady on a Velcro strap. And this is much better than bare hand puppetry because skill 101, eye focus. Every puppeteer is going to tell you start with eye focus. Now, what is eye focus? Eye focus is having the audience be able to tell clearly where the puppet is looking. And this is something that when you're on the stage or when you're performing live is considerably easier than when you're on camera. So this is a really camera specific skill to learn. And I'll give you an example. And this is something that I occasionally slip up with. And this is something that a lot of new people struggle with, is finding camera center. So if you want your character looking at the camera, just like that, there's camera center. Now, if I were to change the angle of this view even a little bit, and I mean, that's half an inch, this is like a centimeter or two. That's nothing. But suddenly this character is not looking in the camera now. Now the character is looking in the camera. Now the character is not looking in the camera. And so you have very little wiggle room to find camera center. And this is something, if you go back and look at the early episodes of The Oracle, I really struggled with. I can't tell you how many takes I threw away because the character was looking off in the wrong direction. Now, how do you build this skill? Again, practice, practice, practice. And the thing that I found, and that was really interesting to me, is you will build a muscle memory for understanding where camera center is based on what you're looking at in the monitor. And it has to be looking in the monitor. It can't be looking at the camera. Camera center should be kind of your default position. When you bring the puppet up, immediately you should be able to find camera center. And if you can't, that is a skill to work on. And then one of the ways you can work on it is literally just start from nothing and then bring the puppet up. Start from nothing, bring the puppet up. And another important skill to learn, and this is something that I struggle with personally, is keeping the puppet steady, keeping that position locked. If your muscles aren't terribly toned, or if you haven't got the muscle memory for it, you can find, and I do this all the time, that your puppet's kind of drifting or kind of wiggling around. That is something that again, you will only get better with practice. And it's not necessarily even about muscle mass, it's more about muscle memory. And so that will become easier the more you practice, even if you're not necessarily building muscle mass. It's not really about strength, it's about muscle memory. It's about just repeatedly doing it over and over again. So there is the first thing you can practice. It's literally just starting out of camera, coming into camera. Starting out of camera, coming into camera. So in terms of eye focus, you want to make sure that the audience always knows where the character is looking. And when the character is looking at a thing, you're locked onto that thing. You're not drifting around. You're not having hesitating movements. You're not sort of looking off and trying to refocus. You are locked. So, for example, looking at me, looking back at the camera, looking at me. And here's a little side tip working for the camera. One good thing to get in the habit of doing is, let's say your puppet is going to turn to the side and look at something. Instead of turning like this, where you're doing sort of a full 90-degree turn, always try and keep both pupils in the camera at the same time. So what you want to do is you want to dip a little bit, and you want to keep both of those pupils visible. You don't want to obfuscate one like that. And so it's a good sort of habit to get into, is when you're turning the head to also dip a little bit. So, like that. Sorry, back into, here we go, bad puppetry. So, turning that way, turning that way. And you see I'm doing a little bit of a dip. The sort of the leading eye, the eye that's in the foreground, is going down. And that really helps the audience kind of get a sense that the character is present much more than if you do that. So this is something you're going to hear again and again, is that the only way to get better at this stuff is practice. One good way to practice is get in your monitor and then just start looking at the four corners of your monitor. And just practice that over and over again. It sounds dull, and it is dull, but the more you practice it, the better it will be. Sometimes you can just practice looking at nothing, but having the impression that the character is looking at something. So there's your first series of tips. Practice without a puppet or a simple puppet. If you're going to do this for the camera, you need to practice with a camera and a monitor. When you're doing a head turn, tilt the head so that both pupils are always in view of the camera. And practice, practice, practice. I also want to point out that all of these tips and techniques are things that you would be doing in an ideal situation. You will very rarely be in an ideal situation. Maybe you're tired, maybe you're a little nervous in front of the camera, maybe you're in a cramped position, maybe you can't see your monitor clearly. So any number of things can go wrong. You will very rarely be perfect. You shouldn't let that discourage you. All of these things are just things you should be trying to aim for, but if you don't hit the mark, that's perfectly fine. If you go back and look at the Oracle, I'm violating all of the things that I'm talking about right now, constantly. You will very rarely hit that perfect mark. There will be moments when you do, and those are going to be great, but when you don't let that discourage you. Keep going, keep practicing. There's no finish line. There's no point at which you go, okay, now I'm done. Now I'm a perfect puppeteer. You're always going to be constantly working and improving. And that's the mentality you have to get into, that this is a process. There's no end state here. Every professional will tell you that there is no point at which you're done. You are constantly learning. You are constantly growing. And that's part of the joy of it, is this continual process. So enjoy the journey. So there we go. There's the first video in our little series of tips and tricks of learning the basics of puppetry for the camera. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't worry, there is more Oracle coming, I promise. But there's also going to be more of this kind of stuff on the channel, and I hope you enjoy it. And thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.